Greetings, my name is Danielle Pailly, and I'm a nationally board-certified positive psychology and mindfulness coach. I'm also a multimedia content creator, multi-genre author, and book coach. Now, today we're talking about thinking traps. These are the unhelpful, repetitive thoughts that can lead to unhappiness, stress, and a very narrow way of thinking with no seeming way out of our problems, or we have very limited solutions in our minds because our minds are ruminating on the worst thing that can happen, the bad things that are going to happen. And these thinking traps tend to change the way we view ourselves and others, usually in a negative way. And we all fall into these traps at some point. I'm going to identify 10 of them today, and we'll close with a few tips for how you can kind of alter your mindset to look for a more positive way of being. Number 1, absolute thinking or polarized thinking. This is an all or nothing mindset about ourselves or about other people. This particular group is all good, this one is all bad. And unfortunately, we see this a lot in politics, in religion, in cultural biases, and they show up in our personal lives. And we may find ourselves, if we're an absolute thinker, falling into this trap, saying things like, there's no good left in the world, or I can never do anything right, or people don't like having me around because they think I'm too boring, or maybe I will never host a YouTube channel because I don't like being on video. And yet, here we are. Number 2, labeling and mislabeling. I have failed at something, therefore I'm a failure. So it's labeling yourself instead of that single incident. Or here's one I like to challenge people with. Somebody accidentally cut you off in traffic and you think, wow, that person's a complete idiot. When in reality, we don't know what happened. They could have had a health event or some kind of emergency. Other ways we label people. Oh, she's such a drama queen, or I'm unlovable. Label, label, label. Another one that I see a lot of in coaching is the shoulding and musting. So I should have done this. I must do that. It's where we create all these rules for ourselves. And sometimes these rules are remnants from our upbringing. They come from societal expectations. But the biggest one are self-imposed obligations. I should be able to work a full-time job and take care of my kids and do all these amazing things and be person of the year. You know, I must be doing something wrong. I must do this better. And we put a lot of pressure. And sometimes it's asking ourselves, well, if the shoulds aren't there, what do you want to do? What motivates you? Where do you thrive? The next one, social comparison. We're looking on our social media pages, and everyone has it easier than us. Everyone has something that we want that we don't have. And it's coming from this place of lack where we don't have enough of something: resources, support, money, education, experience, material goods, and so forth. And when we compare ourselves to others, we rarely come out of it saying, I'm as good as everybody else. Maybe some people say I'm better than everybody else, but for the most part, when we engage in social comparison, we ourselves feel like we come up short. Next one, personalization. This would be taking all the blame for everything. I also talk to people about this in my coaching practice, because when something goes wrong, the first thought is, what could I have done differently? And that's not a bad thought, except when the conclusion is, I'm the reason everything went wrong. And this can be expanded into making every bad event about you. The lights go out in the house, it's not the storm outside. You must have done something wrong in the house. If something goes wrong at work and there's a workplace conflict and you replay, I could have done all of this differently, or a relationship ends, It's got to be my fault. I did this wrong. I did this wrong. I did this wrong. Not realizing that there are other people around you that are involved in that situation. And the next is mind reading and fortune telling. Now, this is different from perspective taking, right? If you're in conflict with someone and you want to understand how they're feeling, why they see things differently, that's a good thing. It's a way to develop empathy and understanding. What we're talking about with mind reading and fortune telling is really assuming you know what's going to happen, assuming you know exactly what someone is thinking. An example of this could be, I'm not going to apply for the job because this boss hates me. They're never going to hire me. So you don't even try because you assume failure from the get-go. The next one is magnification and minimization. Magnification is that catastrophic thinking, that worst case scenario. An example of this is, I made a mistake at work and now the entire company is going to go bankrupt. And in reality, it might have been a very small mistake that somebody else caught and it never went beyond that simple situation. Or minimization, you do something big for someone and they're thanking you and you're like, oh, that was no big deal. And you don't give yourself enough credit for, say, the good things. Again, these are just a couple of examples. Overgeneralization. This relationship didn't work out, so I'm never going to find love. Overgeneralization is taking one scenario and making everything based on that event, and you start looking for ways to make that true. So think about some of the generalizations you tell yourself about life around you and how it could be skewing your view, and that is kind of the lens with which you view the world. And then there's taking things out of context. That's applying these mental filters, and we might end up focusing on all good or all bad because we're not seeing the whole picture. And an example of this would be, say, if you're dating someone and you ignore all the red flags, you focus on the good, you might make excuses for the bad because you want to see this person exactly as you have them envisioned in your mind. Another example, say in a workplace, would be if you got a work review and the boss says all these great things about you, but then they offer that one area of improvement. And when you leave the meeting, that's all you're thinking about is how terrible of an employee you are because you messed up in this one area. And finally, emotional reasoning. It must be true because I feel it so strongly. I know my convictions are right. I know my religion is right. I know that that person is my soulmate because I can't imagine living my life with anyone else. And that person may or may not give you the time of day, but you feel it so strongly, so you reason in your mind, it must be true. So I'm going to end with a few mental exercises that you can try when you find yourself falling into one or more of these traps, which again, we all do from time to time. It is normal. The first one would be to ask yourself, is this true? Whatever the thought is. And then say what else might be true. And this could be a good journaling activity or something you talk about with a coach. What else might be true? And I encourage you to be as outlandish and big as you want to be, because the more that you expand your thinking, the more solutions you're going to come up with. You're also going to find some of the humor like, oh, you know what? Now that I think about it, maybe that thought is a little unrealistic. And then the third part of this group would be to ask yourself, can you choose a new believable thought? Right? And I say believable. So maybe you're not going to tell yourself, I love myself completely. But maybe instead of saying, oh, I hate myself, I don't like myself, you can say, I'm learning to like myself. Another question you might ask yourself to pull yourself out of a thinking trap would be, what do I want for myself outside of what I think I should do? Or regardless of what other people want me to do, what do I want for myself? And this is a big one if you find yourself doing a lot of that shoulding and musting. The next one, if you are doing deep trauma work with a therapist, you might want to save this for a session. If you're prone to panic attacks, you might not want to do this one. You might want to skip over it. If you feel like you're in an emotionally good place, a really good one for overcoming that catastrophic thinking would be to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Like literally, what is the worst? And if the worst happens, how will I cope with that situation? How will I find a way through? And sometimes the solution is the reality of that happening is really, really minuscule. Or, you know what? If that happened, it would be terrible, but here are the steps that I would take so I would be okay. And the last one is a little bit of an affirmation. And this is something that you might actually want to write and put somewhere where you can see it. What can I tell myself when I fall into this thinking trap? For example, if you start telling yourself you're unworthy, you're unlovable, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, when you hear those thoughts, the question is, what can I tell myself when I fall into this thinking trap? It could be, I am worthy of love. I'm learning to like myself. I'm learning to accept myself. I can see the beauty in myself, whatever it is. Now, I have a few different tools that you might find helpful to continue working through thinking traps. Number one, you can reach out to me for a coaching conversation. My information is below. You might choose to go to Insight Timer, where I have an online journaling course for creativity and positive thinking and also working through these traps. There is the I Am Enough journaling workbook that I have on Amazon and at your favorite bookseller. And there's also a Udemy course that I co-created with my colleague, Dr. Marcy Leverage, on stress reduction that talks about this negative thinking. And Dr. Leverage offers a lot of insight on how we stress ourselves out with our thoughts and what we can do about them. And all that information is in the description of this episode. Thanks for joining me.